So when I got back to university that fall, I was totally drained, and I think beginning to feel the need to rebel. I realized that I had wasted a summer doing something that I hated because my dad was pushing me, and it was so. Anyway, I did. I couldn't concentrate. I I was still in pre med. But the one good, I'll talk about basketball later, which was one of my salvations. But anyway, I ended up failing out of university. I failed three of the five courses. The only two courses I passed were English and psychology. The three science courses I was taking as part of pre med, I failed miserably. And you can imagine how painful that was when the results came in. My mom got them. She naturally had to be the one to open the mail, and she handed it to me and said, "Well, I guess this is the end for you." Thank you, Mom, for your confidence. Anyway, in so many ways, my life was being seriously polluted by the fact that I had been taught to be obedient, and I couldn't break that. At that point, I couldn't break that control. So anyway, I got a job. The university said normally they would force you to stay out for 2 years if you flunked out. But they said because of your good record and because we realized there must be special circumstances, they said we will allow you back. But I wasn't prepared to go back, so I got a job and decided to go on a mission for the church. So I worked for 10 months and saved every penny that I made practically, and in January I took off on my mission. I
56.
Yeah, I gave enough money to my dad to cover my expenses. We had to pay our own way in that context, and I went off to South Africa to convert the heathen to Mormonism, providing they weren't black, of course. Uh, okay.
Do you want to keep going about your university career? Then you eventually went back
Well,
to
yes,
school?
maybe this would be a good time. I stayed out of university for 3 years. I was in South Africa for 2 years. I came back, and I went back to university. By this time, I knew that there was no way I was going to go and do pre med. I loved English. I loved literature, and so I decided I'd be a school teacher, and I registered in some English courses. I was lucky at that point. I had enough science courses that I didn't have to do the required science anymore. And one of my English teachers, who was also a published poet, the first essay that I handed in, he called me into his office and he said, "You obviously have the potential to go a long way in this field." And he said, "I would like to invite you to come and be part of one of my graduate seminars, just as an auditor." And I said, "Well, yeah, gee, that was." And then he proceeded to paint this wonderful picture of how satisfying life was when you were an English professor. So I I went to I audited his course, and I started getting really good marks in English, and eventually I got a BA at the U of A, and then they offered me a teaching assistantship to work on an MA. So I spent 2 years getting an MA, and I started teaching English, and I discovered that I really liked it. I really enjoyed teaching English. So I stayed out of university for a year and just taught full time as a teaching assistant. And then I cast around at various universities, and I got accepted in the PhD program at the University of Washington. By then I had 2 kids and a third one on the way, and we took off to Washington, and those were some of the best years. It was so exciting. It was just incredible. One every day was a discovery of some idea that was beautiful and that helped me understand myself and what was important in the world. And I was getting really good marks as well, and enjoying the teaching, except I had to deal with kids who were, boys especially, who were scared shitless that they were going to get drafted to go to Vietnam and begged me to raise their marks. Those kinds of issues were just, they were so heavy and so horrendous. But I knew if I got involved in any way in being influenced with my marks, that was a no-brainer. I mean, I could have been in so much personal turmoil over that, because if I raised their mark, then some other kid was going to have to go fight in Vietnam. But it caused me to realize that there's something wrong here, and I started going to Vietnam meetings, listening to speakers, reading up, and I realized that that war was a wicked, wicked war, and that the U.S. had no business being there whatsoever. So it was an important force in forcing me to reassess my life and my values. The church that I was still belonged to was gung-ho about going to Vietnam. It was our duty, our patriotic duty, and fighting communism was God's will and all that kind of stuff.
So you ended up getting a teaching job in Edmonton.
Yes, I graduated from the University of Washington in 1966, still working on my dissertation. They gave me a PhD without the thesis. Anyway, I was planning to finish it anyway, but so I got this job. I got offered 11 jobs. I put out 13 applications and got 11 offers. And in the end, I chose the U of A, my alma mater, because I didn't have to teach freshman composition. They had no freshman composition course. You started right out teaching literature to first-year students, and I think I made the right choice. I loved my teaching. I enjoyed it so much for 13 years.
But then it eventually became dissatisfying for you?
Well, I began to discover that the traditional way that English was taught in university was not very helpful to students, and it didn't promote real understanding of literature. Most of the professors had notes from years past, and they would give the same lecture on the same works of literature every year. And there was no interaction between the students and the professors. Students would sit and write stuff and then regurgitate it on the exams. And I realized that was not helping people to get to the essence of literature. So I asked for classrooms that had seating where you could sit in a circle, and where there wasn't a lectern with the professor standing at the front. And I worked really hard to get discussion. I would ask questions, leading questions, and I also would have, for every work of art or every work of literature that we dealt with, I would have a committee of students who would meet together and discuss what it meant to them, and then bring that material to the class. And then after one class like that, then I would talk about what it meant to me. And I had students that just loved it. They had never had that kind of experience before, and they really felt that it changed their lives. I still run into them periodically, students, middle-aged guys, you know, who will say, "You taught me English, you know, back in 1970, and it changed my life." And that gives me huge satisfaction, as you can imagine. And basically it's because I insisted that the fundamental approach to literature was to encourage people to look at what it meant to them. What characters do you identify with? How does the plot help to reveal those characters? Questions like that invited a personal response. And then I eventually went even further, and I decided final exams were, as traditionally conceived, were really ridiculous in English. And so I had students come up with 5 exam questions ahead of time. And I discussed with them, you know, like what makes a good exam question. And every student I had an interview with, and I helped a lot of them to come up with a more reasonable kind of exam. And then when they came to write the exam, I had them I picked 2 of the 5 questions that they submitted and asked them to write those. And of course that meant that they knew what to study, they knew what to prepare for, and it was something that really helped them to understand the literature. And I was able to judge whether they had been able to, you know, to develop an approach to literature that was working for them. But the other profs were real uptight about it because that was somehow so radical. I don't know, still to this day, I'm not sure exactly why it was so radical. But they even where I taught a course that had multi-sections, they decided that everybody had to pass their exams into a committee, and it was directed. It's obviously directed at me, and that just finally made me realize that academia was not my bag. I wasn't a great researcher. I was a good teacher. Yes.
I remember when you were up for your tenure, and I think at one point you were voted as the most popular professor on the campus.
Yes, I was. The student newspaper published this cartoon on the front page, and it showed a guy who was labeled as a the word not well, a guy who was an administrator, okay, and he had this saw, and he was cutting on a limb that was labeled Daryl Butler.
Is that right?
And anyway, the dean of arts came to me, and he was quite upset, you know, and he said, I realize you're a unique kind of teacher, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a week interviewing your students. I'm not going to talk to the regular ones. I'm going to talk to the grad students you're teaching, and the students taking your senior course, and I will use that as the evaluation for your tenure. Well, I knew, you know, students would come to me after going to the interview and tell me exactly what was said and so on, and I know I was getting glowing recommendations from them. But at the end of the week, the dean of arts came to me and said, I would be happy to have the kind of recommendations that I got from all of your students. And he said, I'm going to give you tenure without question.